The combine had stopped moving at 10 past 3 in the afternoon. Not from mechanical failure. The engine was running, the header was turning, the grain was still flowing through the thrashing drum. The machine was doing everything it was designed to do. What it was not doing was moving. The front axle had settled into the field at a rate that the operator, a man named Thays who had been running combines for the Ritter Contracting Company for 7 years, had recognized too late as the specific kind of settling that does not stop. The field in question was the northeast corner of the Engerdal wheat block, 32 hectares of flat lower Bavarian agricultural land belonging to the cooperative that managed the estates on the north side of the valley. The crop had been excellent. The weather in August had been textbook dry but not too dry, the grain filling well, the straw standing without lodging. September had arrived with 3 days of rain, which was unwelcome but not unusual, and had then produced the crisp dry weather that experienced farmers called harvest weather and that contractors had come to count on. The contractor Klaus Ritter had arrived with his new Klaus combine on Monday and expected to finish the 32 hectares by Wednesday evening. By Tuesday afternoon, the combine was resting on its rear axle housing with its front wheels invisible beneath the surface of what had looked, from the cab, like a slightly damp patch of perfectly ordinary wheat field. It was not a slightly damp patch. The northeast corner of the Engerdal block had a hidden problem that was not in any modern soil survey. A clay pan, a dense, impermeable layer of compacted clay, lying approximately 35 centimeters below the surface, invisible from above, that prevented drainage from the topsoil down to the lower strata. After the 3 days of rain, the topsoil above the clay pan had become saturated. The surface had dried quickly in the September sun, producing a thin crust that bore the weight of a person walking and the first pass of lighter equipment. Under the 7 tons of the Klaus combine, with its wheels pressing down through the dry crust into the saturated layer beneath, the crust had failed at the worst possible moment in the worst possible corner of the field. Ritter had been called from the yard at 4. He had arrived by 4:30 and had looked at his combine, 600,000 marks of modern agricultural engineering, sitting up to its rear axle in wet clay with the grain still in the drum and the header folded, and had begun making calls. By 6 o'clock, he had stopped getting useful answers on the phone. If this is your first story on this channel, subscribe now and hit the bell. New story every single day. Let me tell you about the northeast corner of the Engerdal block and about what a clay pan does to a harvest, because the ground is where this story lives. The Engerdal was a shallow valley in the lower Bavarian agricultural plain, not dramatic, not scenic, the kind of landscape that farming people describe with words like productive and reliable, and that people who have not farmed it would find simply flat and slightly monotonous. The soil was good. The land had been under cultivation for at least 300 years, and 300 years of careful farming had built up a topsoil that produced excellent grain yields in most conditions. In most conditions. The clay pan in the northeast corner was a geological remnant, a lens of compacted glacial clay deposited during the Ice Age retreat that had never been broken up or drained and that had, for the past 3 centuries, quietly undermined the drainage of that specific corner of the block whenever rainfall exceeded a certain threshold. It was not a large feature, perhaps 40 meters by 30, and it was entirely invisible at the surface. The cooperative soil survey from 1955 had mapped the general field drainage characteristics, but had not identified the clay pan specifically, partly because the 1955 autumn had been dry and the pan had not caused problems that year. Georg Maier had known about the clay pan since 1938, when his father had pointed it out to him after a wet September had caused an identical problem with a horse-drawn thrashing machine in that specific corner. His father had noted the location in the farm management book and had installed, in the spring of 1936, a stone-filled drainage cut running at a diagonal from the northwest corner of the clay pan section to the field boundary ditch on the east side. The cut had been filled with crushed stone and then covered with topsoil. It was invisible from the surface, as drainage infrastructure is designed to be. But beneath the soil, at approximately 20 centimeters, the crushed stone column ran for approximately 35 meters at an angle of 40 degrees to the field boundary. Georg had known where it was because he had helped his father install it when he was 16. He had known what it could bear because he had driven across it with various equipment in the intervening 30 years. He was 64 years old. He had been watching the Ritter combine work the Engertel block since Monday morning from the road that ran along the east field boundary. He had noted when it entered the northeast corner. He had watched it begin to sink. He had gone to the barn and taken the lance. Ritter had made his third attempt at extraction at 5:30. His first attempt had been with his own tractor, a modern machine, 110 horsepower, good traction tires. He had attached a cable to the combine's rear drawbar and pulled from the northwest. The tractor's rear tires had spun in the wet topsoil. It had been clear within 30 seconds that the tractor was beginning to sink itself. He had disengaged before it went past the point of no return. The combine had moved perhaps 20 centimeters. His second attempt had involved borrowing a tractor from the neighboring farm, a Jutz with a front loader, 80 horsepower, and working it alongside his own, both pulling. The combined traction had been better. The combine had moved approximately 40 centimeters before both tractors had lost traction simultaneously. The combine had not moved at all after that. His third attempt had involved a different angle. He had repositioned his own tractor to pull from the north. The combine had rotated approximately 15 degrees, but had not moved upward or outward. The grain in the drum was now at risk of fermentation if the machine remained overnight. It was during the third attempt, while standing at the field edge watching his tractor spin its wheels in the darkening September afternoon, that Ritter noticed the elderly man with the Lanz Bulldog parked at the east field boundary. Georg Maier was looking at the field, not at the combine or at Ritter's tractors, at the field, at the surface of it. At the specific section of ground between the field boundary and the stuck machine. Ritter walked to the fence. "We do not need another tractor," he said. He said it without particular hostility. He was tired and he was running out of daylight. But he said it with the certainty of someone who has tried 3 different approaches. Georg looked at him. "There is a stone drainage cut under the field at this position," he said. He pointed at a line from the field boundary gate to a point approximately 10 meters from the combine's front axle. "My father installed it in 1936. Crushed stone 35 centimeters below the surface. It runs at 40 degrees from the boundary to the clay pan edge." He looked at Ritter. "The lance can approach along the cut line. The cut will support it. From that position, the pull is diagonal and upward. The combine's nose comes up as it moves. Straight extraction does not work because the clay suction acts uniformly on the base plate. Diagonal extraction at the correct angle breaks the seal from the front first." Ritter looked at the field, at the lance. "A drainage cut I cannot see," he said. "You cannot see it because it was covered when it was installed," Georg said. "But it is there. I helped my father put it in. I was 16. One of Ritter's operators made a sound that was not a laugh, but was related to one. Ritter looked at the combine. The September light was dropping. The grain in the drum had been sitting for 2 hours. He looked at his 2 tractors with their tire marks around them. "How long?" he said. 40 minutes, Georg said. Ritter said, "All right." Let me tell you what Georg Maier knew about wet clay extraction that Klaus Ritter's 7 years of contracting had not taught him. Extracting a machine from saturated clay requires 3 things: a firm approach path, a pull angle that progressively breaks the clay suction seal as the machine moves, and a pulling force that is steady rather than intermittent. Ritter had failed on all 3. His tractors had approached across the wet topsoil, which yielded under their tires and reduced traction as it did so. His pull angles had been horizontal northeast, then north, applying force parallel to the clay surface rather than at the upward diagonal that would lift the combine's front as it moved. And his pulls had been intermittent, the tractors spinning, recovering traction briefly, pulling, losing traction again, producing jerks rather than sustained force, each jerk allowing the clay to reseal around the base plate. The stone drainage cut addressed the first problem. Crushed stone at 35 centimeters depth creates a load-bearing column that distributes the lance's weight into the lower strata rather than the saturated topsoil. The lance moves across the cut line without sinking because the stone carries the weight that the clay cannot. The diagonal approach line addressed the second problem. A pull at 40 degrees from the field boundary applied upward force to the combine's front axle as the machine moved. The combine would not move straight backward. It would rotate around its rear axle, the front coming up and forward, the clay suction seal breaking from the front rather than being pulled against uniformly. This was the correct extraction geometry for a machine with a wide base plate in saturated clay. The flywheel addressed the third problem. When the seal began to break at the front, the resistance would drop suddenly, and any machine applying force with a high-powered engine at that moment would surge forward, potentially snapping the cable or jerking the combine. The Lance's flywheel prevented this. The force delivery was smooth and continuous, 1 stroke per second, the energy stored in the spinning iron and released without surge. When the seal broke at the front, the Lance would simply continue at the same rate. The combine would come out steadily. Georg had not calculated this. He had pulled equipment from wet fields on this land for 30 years, always from the drainage cut line that his father had shown him. He knew it worked because it had always worked. Subscribe now, because what happens in the northeast corner of the Engertle field in the next 40 minutes is why this valley still tells this story. He set fire to the Lance at the field boundary gate. This was the phrase Ritter used when he described the scene afterward, that the old man had set fire to his tractor, because Ritter had not been close enough to understand what the blowtorch applied to the base of the engine was doing, and because, from 40 meters away across a September field, what it looked like was a man holding a flame to his machine, the blue-orange of the blowtorch, the cast iron beginning to glow at the base of the engine, the small visible warmth of it in the early evening air. 10 minutes. September evenings still carry summer warmth, but the ground is cold, and the ground coldness moves into the iron if the machine has been standing at a field boundary for more than an hour. The Glühkopf needed the full 10 minutes. Georg held the torch and counted. 10 minutes, the color came. He set the torch aside. He took the starting crank. He turned it once. He turned it again. On the third turn, the engine fired. Pum! The sound went out across the September field, across the wheat stubble and the wet clay and the standing combine, and Ritter's 2 tractors with their tire marks around them, and came back from the field boundary trees on the far side with a slight delay, the flat land giving it back without amplification, just the open return of sound across agricultural space. Pum pum pum. 1 beat per second in a September field at 6 in the evening. The exhaust pipe sent its smoke into the early dusk. Georg climbed onto the open seat and drove the Lance to the field boundary gate and through it. He found the drainage cut line the way his father had shown him, by counting paces from the southeast gate post, 12 paces at 40 degrees from the boundary, and feeling for the slight difference in resistance underfoot that crushed stone gives back through the sole of a boot. He pressed his heel down at 3 points. The stone was there. He drove the Lance onto the cut line. Hit subscribe. New story every single day. Stay with this. Pum pum pum. The Lance moved across the field on the drainage cut line. The difference was immediate and unmistakable, not visible, but felt through the seat and the frame of the machine. Firm ground where everything else in this corner was not firm. the wide rear tires pressing down through the topsoil and meeting the crushed stone column at 35 centimeters and finding a completely different answer from the clay on either side. Ritter's operators, watching from beside the stuck tractors, had stopped talking. Georg reached the position he had calculated, approximately 10 meters from the combine's front axle on the line of the drainage cut. He stopped. He climbed down. He attached the winch cable to the combine's front axle tow hook, not the rear drawbar that Ritter had used, but the front, and positioned the cable at the angle the drainage cut's geometry naturally provided, 40 degrees from the field boundary, which translated to a pull that was forward and slightly upward relative to the combine's settled position. He checked the attachment, he walked back to the Lanz, he climbed on. He engaged the winch drum. Pum pum pum. The cable came taut, the flywheel turned. The combine sat in the clay with 7 tons of weight and 2 hours of suction and said nothing. For 30 seconds the combine did not move. The engine was working. The drainage cut stone was carrying the Lanz's weight cleanly. The force transmitted from the winch drum to the combine's front axle without interruption. Then the front of the combine moved. Not backward, upward and forward, the nose rotating slightly around the rear axle as the pull angle lifted it. The clay at the front of the base plate, under upward and forward force, began to yield from the leading edge inward. The seal was not being broken uniformly. It was being peeled from the front. Ritter was watching. He had moved to a position where he could see the combine's front axle and the cable angle simultaneously. 4 centimeters. 8. The front axle was coming up toward the surface. The machine was rotating. As the front came up, the effective leverage increased. Each additional centimeter of nose rise reduced the suction load on the remaining clay contact area proportionally. At 16 centimeters of nose rise, the rear axle began to move. Georg held the throttle, the flywheel held the pull, the drainage cut stone held the Lanz. The combine came up out of the clay in the specific way that correctly extracted machines come up, not suddenly, not dramatically, but in the continuous measured movement of something that has made its decision and is following through. The base plate cleared the clay surface. The wheels found purchase. The machine was on the field surface. Georg pulled it to the drainage cut line and drove both machines to the field gate. Pum pum pum. The combine was on the road at 7 o'clock. The grain in the drum was undamaged. Ritter came to him at the gate. "Maier," he said. Georg was detaching the winch cable. "The stone cut," Ritter said. "Your father installed it in 1936. You have known about it since you were 16. "Yes," Georg said. "And the angle, the front axle instead of the rear." "Clay suction is uniform on the base plate," Georg said. "You pull from the rear and you are pulling against the full suction area simultaneously. You pull from the front at a diagonal and you peel it from the leading edge. The seal breaks in stages rather than all at once." He set down the cable. "Your tractors were powerful enough. The angle was wrong." Ritter was quiet. "I should have asked you before I made 3 attempts," he said. Georg looked at him. "You did not know I knew the field. I did not know you needed to be told." He climbed onto the Lanz. "The drainage cut is on the cooperative's field management records. My father submitted the installation documents in 1936. The records are in the cooperative office." He drove the Lanz back to the barn. Pum pum pum. The Angertal harvest was completed by Thursday noon. The cooperative's field management committee reviewed the clay pan section in October and added it to the drainage priority list for the following spring. A new drainage installation in the northeast corner was completed in April of 1962. The 1936 drainage cut that Georg's father had installed was incorporated into the new network. The installation team noted it in their records as prior infrastructure in good condition. It had been installed for 42 marks worth of crushed stone in 1936, and had been working quietly and invisibly for 26 years. When Ritter's contracting company came back to work the Engertel block in subsequent years, Ritter had made it his practice to walk the field boundaries on the first morning and speak to any farmer present. He had put this in his company's pre-harvest procedure notes. The notes said, "Speak to the boundary farmers before entering unfamiliar fields. They know what the surveys don't." Georg Maier continued farming the Engertel boundary land until 1975. The Lanz stayed on the farm. The Lanz fired on the third turn of the crank every spring until 1979. Pum. Some knowledge is not in the Cooperative Soil Survey because the Cooperative Soil Survey was conducted once, in a dry year, by people who did not have the history of this specific corner. Some knowledge is in the farm management book that Georg's father had maintained since 1928, the book that Georg had read and internalized until its entries were not records anymore but certainties. The harvest contractors had the combine, Georg Maier had the field. And the field, in the northeast corner, in the wet September of 1961, had a layer of crushed stone 35 centimeters down that had been waiting 25 years to do exactly what it did. The drainage cut remembered. Pum.